evening. We're delighted to be facilitating this discussion. It's, I think, a very interesting and timely topic, and we hope that there'll be a lively Q&A session towards the end, hopefully. So if you have any questions throughout or at the end, just pop them in the chat box, and Helena will be facilitating the discussion, the Q&A towards the end. Just to flag before we begin, my colleague at Climate Case Ireland, Matthew Mollihan, is moderating the kind of tech side of things. So if anyone has any issues, just send him a message in the chat. And yeah, and so it's myself, Helena, and Matthew here tonight. So my name is Emer Slattery, and just a big welcome to everyone. We're delighted to be joined by a really high caliber of guests. We're actually so thrilled. So we have the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and the Environment, David Boyd. And we have Professor Ailbhe Smyth, who we all know as a legendary Irish activist. And we're so grateful to Ailbhe for all her work and hope that we can learn something from her tonight. And then we also are joined by Carlos Olaya, who is joining us from Colombia, and he isn't actually on the call yet. We seem to be having some difficulties, but we're sending our solidarity because we know there are some issues in Colombia at the moment. Oh, look, we're getting a note that he just joined. Excellent. So, great. So before we begin and before you get to hear from the speakers, I just want to introduce why we're talking about this, why now. So I suppose people who have attended or logging into this webinar, you probably are familiar with Climate Case Ireland and have seen how our case has developed over the last couple of years and our success in the Supreme Court last year. So we were obviously delighted with that win in court, but there was one aspect of the judgment that was really interesting for those legal scholars among us, but also a little bit disappointing for someone who is following the campaign. So the Supreme Court found against Friends of the Irish Environment, so our side, on the issue of standing to assert constitutional and European Convention of Human Rights. And the judgment, it was written by the Chief Justice of Ireland, and it was really interesting that even though we weren't found to have standing on those issues, the Chief Justice specifically chose to engage in the judgment with those issues. As he said, to paraphrase, kind of lest by not commenting, it was seen that they implicitly upheld the position. So there had been a developing jurisprudence in the courts that we had an unenumerated right to a healthy environment consistent with the human dignity and well-being of citizens at large. So that had been developing in the High Court jurisprudence since 2017, and it was upheld in the High Court stage of our case, but at the Supreme Court it fell down. So yeah, so I suppose that raised the issue then. It was almost as if we were getting like an unenumerated, so a right to the environment in the Constitution was developing, and then it was kind of taken away almost. So what happens next is the question that we're kind of looking to answer today. You know, you could use strategic litigation to if you had someone whose rights were impacted, an individual could go through the courts. There could be political, in terms of people power, protesting, that kind of thing. And then the other side of it, is to have potentially a referendum. So we're hoping that Ailbhe will be able to talk to us more about that later on. So yeah, that's a bit of background as to where this conversation is coming from. And this webinar, we're hoping, is more of kind of starting the conversation on this issue. Will it be something that we should do to launch a referendum campaign? How would that work? if we were to have something that we're trying to get from tonight is if we were to try and pass a referendum on the issue, what are we actually asking for? What is a right to the environment? Is it a right to a healthy environment, a clean environment, a safe environment? Is it a human right? Is it, as Carlos will, fascinating, he'll be talking to us about rights of nature. Is it that, say, a river or a forest has rights of itself, regardless of, you know, the human's interaction with it? And what something that came up in the Supreme Court judgment for us was the Chief Justice asking, what would a right to the environment add further to the rights we already have, the right to life, right to bodily integrity? So what formulation, if we were to campaign for a right, what would we be asking for specifically? So we're hoping to kind of just raise those issues tonight, tease out some of those questions, and hopefully at the end, I'm hoping that we'll get a good discussion, because I think this is a pretty, you know, it's at the very beginning levels, I suppose. So there's room for everybody's voice to be heard and to tease out the issues. So further to that, we were brought here today to listen to, first of all, we have the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and the Environment, David Boyd. We have from Colombia, joining us from Dejusticia, Carlos Olaya, and then we have Ailbhe Smyth. So we'll hopefully speak in that order. And without any further ado, I'll pass it over to David to get going. So yeah, to David, thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Emma, and greetings everybody from the west coast of Canada. It's a great opportunity to be with you, and exciting to hear this possibility of a push for an Irish referendum on a constitutional right to a healthy environment. I'd like to just start out by congratulating those of you who worked on or supported Climate Case Ireland, obviously one of the leading victories in the world in terms of pushing governments to be accountable to their climate change obligations. And I don't think anybody here would disagree that we are in the midst of an unprecedented global environmental emergency, not just the climate emergency, but also the collapse of biodiversity, pervasive pollution that's killing approximately 10 million people every year, and the surge in these emerging infectious diseases of zoonotic origin, like this COVID-19 pandemic that we have been embroiled in for the past 15 months. And so, you know, scientists are telling us in very clear and unified voices that we need rapid, systemic, and transformative changes. And I think that's where human rights really have a powerful role to play. If we look back over the last couple hundred years of human evolution, whether it was the abolitionist movement to end slavery that used the human rights of equality and freedom to push that agenda forward, or the civil rights movement, the women's rights movement, the indigenous rights movement, the LGBTQ+ movement, persons with disabilities, all of these very powerful social movements have used human rights as a catalyst for the types of systemic and transformative changes that we definitely need to see in response to the global environmental crisis. And that's where this idea of a right to a healthy environment is particularly exciting. This is an idea that actually has deep roots in indigenous cultures and legal systems around the world, but was first brought to kind of Western societal attention by Rachel Carson in the early 1960s in her book, Silent Spring. And then politically first landed on the map in the Stockholm Declaration, which emerged from the first big international environmental summit in Stockholm in 1972. And then in terms of constitutions, it was Portugal in 1976, Spain in 1978 that were the first countries to include the right to a healthy environment in their constitutions. And since that time, it has really grown in all regions of the world to the point where now there are 100 nations that explicitly recognize a right to a healthy environment in their constitutions, and about a dozen more where courts have recognized what's often called an implicit or derived, or as Emmer said, an unenumerated right to a healthy environment. And I think that, you know, I'm going to talk about the impacts that these constitutional environmental rights have had, because I think they make a compelling case for why this is of such great importance. But I also want to say that I'll mostly talk about it from a legal perspective, but it's also culturally important. You know, constitutions are the highest and strongest laws of our countries, but they also are intended to reflect our deepest and most cherished values. And I think from what I know of the Irish people, a healthy environment certainly meets those criteria. As a judge in South Africa once wrote, a constitution is like a mirror of a nation's soul. And I think it's definitely part of the Irish soul to have that commitment to environmental protection. So having sort of sketched that broad outline, what is the right to a healthy environment? Well, that's something I've been working on clarifying through my work as the UN Special Rapporteur. And we can think of the right to a healthy environment as having two main types of elements: substantive elements on the one hand and procedural elements on the other hand. So on the substantive side, there are 6 key elements of the right to a healthy environment, which include clean air, a stable climate, healthy and sustainably produced food, safe and sufficient water, healthy ecosystems and biodiversity, and non-toxic environments where people can live, work, study, and play. And so those 6 things, obviously, that's quite all-encompassing. And that's, to me, part of the beauty and the power of the right to a healthy environment, is it can and it is being used to address each of the global environmental challenges that we face. It also comes with a bundle of procedural rights, which include the right to access to environmental information, participation in decision-making, access to justice with effective remedies, and non-discrimination as well. So with those key elements, we can also look back, and because of the fact that countries started putting the right to a healthy environment in their constitutions back in the 1970s, we now have over 4 decades of experience, which is where we gain that understanding of what the right means. But also we can look and see, what does it actually do? What does it change? And the right to a healthy environment, when it's protected by constitutions, is a catalyst for quite sweeping changes. And I actually wrote a book about this. If anybody's really a keener for information, the book is called The Environmental Rights Revolution. And I looked at the experiences of 92 countries. This was about a decade ago. The experiences of 92 countries. What difference do constitutional environmental rights make? And the answers are very clear and very compelling and very positive. First of all, it's a catalyst for countries to strengthen their environmental laws, regulations, standards, and policies. Second, it produces increased implementation and enforcement of those laws and regulations. Third, it provides for increased public participation in environmental decision-making. Fourth, it reduces environmental injustices. So we live in a world today where vulnerable and marginalized populations, whether women or children or people who are poor, Black, Indigenous, people of color, bear a disproportionate burden of adverse environmental impacts. The right to a healthy environment can help overcome those injustices. And most importantly, and this is really the most important thing, constitutional recognition of the right to a healthy environment leads to improved environmental outcomes. Countries that recognize the right to a healthy environment in their constitutions have reduced air pollution more quickly, have reduced greenhouse gas emissions more quickly, have gained access to safe drinking water for a higher proportion of their populations, and perform better on a wide range of environmental metrics. In fact, there's a new academic article just published last week in a journal called Ecological Economics that does some very complicated statistical analysis and concludes that constitutional environmental rights are a direct causal influence of improved environmental performance. So that's really the bottom line, making a difference in people's lives. And I know time is short, so I'll just share a couple of country examples to give you a sense of what this right can do in a specific context. So Costa Rica is one of my favorite stories. Costa Rica, a developing country in Latin America that added the right to a healthy environment to its constitution in 1994. And that really was a turning point in Costa Rican history. At that time, deforestation had reduced forest cover in Costa Rica to just under 25%. In the 30 years since they recognized the constitutional right to a healthy environment, they have reversed deforestation and now are over 50% of that beautiful country under forest cover. They have created national parks covering almost 30% of their land. they generate almost 100%. They're at about 98% right now of their electricity comes from renewable energy sources, including solar, wind, geothermal, and hydroelectric. They have passed laws prohibiting oil and gas exploration and prohibiting open pit mining. And they have a carbon tax in Costa Rica, and they use the revenue from that carbon tax to pay indigenous people and campesinos, rural residents, to protect and restore farmland and forests. So Costa Rica is really, has undergone this incredible transformation over the last 30 years, which was triggered by this constitutional recognition of the right to a healthy environment. Costa Rica also co-chairs a really interesting international initiative called the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People with France. And the goal of this ambitious coalition is to protect 30% of the Earth's land and waters by 2030. And so it's no coincidence, France, the second story I want to talk about, France is a more recent convert. They added the right to a healthy environment to their constitution in 2004. And they actually did it by creating a 2-page document called the Charter for the Environment. And it's basically 10 principles and then 10 sets of actions. And principle number 1 is that everyone has the right to a healthy environment. And since that time, France has really moved to the forefront globally as an environmental leader. The first country to pass a law banning fracking, the first country to pass a law banning all uses of the bee-killing neonicotine pesticides, the first country in the world to pass a law that prohibits the export of pesticides that are not allowed in France to other countries. And of course, France also passed the pioneering due diligence law, which requires French corporations operating in other countries to conduct human rights and environmental due diligence in their operations right across the supply chain. And so I could share many other specific examples and stories, and perhaps during the question and answers, I'll have that opportunity, but I'm really excited about the prospects of this for Ireland. I think Ireland actually has a key role to play within the European Union. And I do want to just add that I'm working with a group of states to try and secure a pioneering United Nations resolution that will, for the first time, recognize that every person in this world has the right to live in a safe, clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. And, you know, we really need the European Union to be behind that initiative. And Ireland, I think, most recently in the Human Rights Council in March, Ireland signed on to a joint statement with over 65 other countries calling for the recognition of the right to a healthy environment. I'm also part of this global initiative called the Children's Environmental Rights Initiative, which was launched in Spain a couple of years ago with Mary Robinson and a terrific young Irish young youth named Theo. I can't remember Theo's last name, but the Declaration on Children, Youth, and Climate Action. And it would be terrific to have Ireland as a signatory to that declaration as well, which recognizes the right to a healthy environment and calls upon governments to take more ambitious and accelerated action to deal with the specter of climate change. So I'll stop there. Hopefully that's a sufficient introduction to the concept of constitutional environmental rights. And I look forward to our conversation today and to collaborating into the future.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, David. Fascinating stuff. Yeah, I can't wait for the Q&A session at the end. I'll move on to Ailbhe, and I had to write down Ailbhe's accolades because there's too many to remember. So Ailbhe Smyth is, as I said, legendary campaigner here in Ireland. She was the co-director of the Together for Yes referendum campaign in 2018, co-founder and convener of the Coalition to Repeal the 8th Amendment, and strategic advisory for the marriage equality referendum in 2015. Ailbhe has had wide involvement in the NGO sector as chair or board member of a range of organisations. Ailbhe was a senior academic for 40 years and founding head of women's studies at UCD with extensive research and analytical experience. And as we all know, just a feminist icon who we love. So with that, I will pass over to Ailbhe. Thanks, Ailbhe.
Well, hello, everybody, and thank you so much, Emer. You really do flatter me. I think I should point out that, you know, those successes that we had, all of us together, fighting together in Ireland in 2015 with marriage equality and then 2018 with repeal, that for me personally, they came really at the end of the campaigning career. And you have to bear in mind that there was an awful lot of not effective campaigning and not successful campaigning in the lead up. But maybe we learn something as we go. I think maybe we do. And I'm going to be very practical here this evening, because I think David has incredibly eloquently and fascinatingly, but also very elegantly set out the main basis of the whole issue of what we're talking about, and also I think the rationale for in seeking to enshrine a constitutional right to a healthy environment in our own constitution. And I think and thank you for that, David. It was really a pleasure and an honour to hear you speak about that. And I do want to say straight away that I think a referendum is now the way to go for Climate Case Ireland. I think you've been through the courts. Who knows, there may be other things coming. There's change of personnel coming up shortly in the Supreme Court with the new Chief Justice, who will be appointed later this year. Nonetheless, I think that you're absolutely right, because what aiming for a referendum does in the first place is it gives people a goal, it gives them an aim, it helps to harness in a very direct way the power of people. It gives a channel for their appetite. So, and I think that that's probably something which is very important in the environmental movement, broadly speaking, in Ireland at the present time. And I think the other thing, on a more sort of specifically constitutional base, we should use our constitution. Our constitution should not be seen and should not be treated by us as the people for whom of whom the constitution is really, it's there to serve us. We need to see it as a living document, and we need to show through our campaigning that it has to change to give us the rights and the protections that we need as people in a very rapidly changing world. And I think that that's actually a really strong argument for taking this issue onto what we'll call, for want of a better term, the referendum circuit. There is a third reason. Young people are absolutely determined to do something about the environment, as you well know much better than I do. They also have the experience now of successful referendums. They expect to win. They go out there saying that constitution is ours. We want to change that. And that is a huge advantage. That makes your boat float straight away, because people really want it. And obviously you're young and you have energy, you have determination, and you have all of the kind of social media skills that are now so important in referendum campaigns, and which I actually don't have. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about effective campaigns, and I'll try and be as brief as possible. Very general points to start with. There is no template, there is no one size fits all for an effective referendum campaign. The context is everything. The prominence of the issue. How live is it? Is it central on the political agenda? Is it in the consciousness of wider society? All of these things have to be taken into consideration, and where they are lacking, you have to mobilize to put it, to drive it onto the center of the agenda and to make people aware, all of which may be relevant for you in some regard. And timing is very important. And if you think about both marriage equality and repeal, in each case we seized opportunities. Well, we created an opportunity with marriage equality that was taken late after in the last government. And they were initiated that putting the need for a on the agenda, created that opportunity, put it on the map. With repeal, we had sadly an opportunity presented to us through the tragic death of Savita Halappanavar, when it was perfectly clear, and I mean, I knew immediately that happened, that we simply had to move to repeal the 8th to get it out of the Constitution. And there was also the well-known ABC case in the European Court of Human Rights. So everywhere you look in these referendums, there are court cases, there are High Court cases and Supreme Court cases and European cases lurking, not always producing the outcomes that those pursuing the cases had intended or wanted or desired, but nonetheless providing a kind of edifice in which campaigning also can take place, and also raising the appetite and the information levels of very important people like lawyers who suddenly begin to see this as these are areas that they have to concern themselves with. However, I would also say that in each of those campaigns that I've mentioned, you see that building towards a referendum is very important. The Gilligan's-Upon case came up in the earlier 2000s, and in fact, Marriage Equality was started as an organisation around about 2007 or 2008. And Repeal, we founded the Coalition to Repeal the Eighth Amendment way back in 2013, when we decided that what we needed to do was to form a broad-based coalition and to aim for something achievable. And I will come back to that, because what you need to do first, there are two moments in campaigning, in referendum campaigning. You have first to have the campaign which convinces and persuades government to call a referendum. So you just don't roll into a referendum. That takes time, and it takes an enormous amount of persuasion and specifically of lobbying. It's very important in that process to engage wider society, and we were very fortunate in both cases that we had a participative forum, the Constitutional Convention in the case of marriage equality, and then Citizens' Assembly in the case of repeal. Now, there has already been a Citizens' Assembly in the case of the environment, and in a way, it was good that that happened, but in fact, it means that the momentum from that is going to have to be recreated, because that momentum is no longer there. So something new has to be done. And those participative forums, they are really important because they do engage wider society. They map the terrain of the debate. They enable you to test out arguments, to kind of pilot run all kinds of arguments against your opponents. And they also give a government courage, or indeed reveal a government as not having courage when it sneaks back into a dark cave. But when these forums are full of impact and well led and actually come out with the right results, they are really important. So there may be some thinking to be done about reinvigorating the results that came from the Citizens' Assembly on the environment, and even seeing if there can't be a new special moment for that kind of forum to take place again. In each case, what you're doing all the time is you are constantly pushing the issue, and lobbying, I should say, you never stop lobbying. You are talking all the time to people who you think can move this issue along. Politicians, because the gift of a referendum is in their hands. The gift of winning the referendum is in the hands of the people, but they provide us with the opportunity to harness the people power. So you never stop lobbying, and you also lobby people of influence. I refuse to call them influencers, and you have quite a team, because there are sort of horses for courses. So all kinds of people can and need to become involved in that process. As you lobby for a referendum, you are all the time defining your demands, refining your message, and outlining your strategy and developing it and fleshing it out. The first question, of course, in defining the demand is the one that Emer quite rightly referred to in her introduction. What exactly are you looking for? You have to be, and in fact, David also was referencing this throughout his talk. What is it you are asking for? What do you need? What do you want? And you have to frame that demand in terms that are clear, concise, and achievable. There is absolutely no point in trying to go for something that can't be achieved, or that isn't appropriate, or that is confusing. It simply won't run in a referendum. And that takes a long time. It takes time to get it right. I mean, we did think long and hard about what we wanted to do. And there was a lot of pressure to ask for abortion on demand or the right to abortion or words of that kind. And a number of us, well, a few of us felt that that wouldn't run in Ireland, that people couldn't even at that stage say the word abortion, never mind actually go and do something with it in some kind of ballot box. So, and they certainly wouldn't go on television and debate it as abortion. So we had to find another way. And then we thought, well, what's the major obstacle to having a right for a woman and anybody who can become pregnant to have abortion? It is the 8th Amendment. So let's go for a repeal of the 8th Amendment. And I think in the case of marriage equality, again, that issue was clear from the get-go. That was what was required. The second thing then that you need to do in relation to your demand at the same time, it's really helpful if you can give yourselves a time frame and say, we're going to do this. We're going to do it in a year, 2 years. Back in 2013, I said, we're going to do this in 5 years. And actually we did. I mean, I think that was just luck rather than anything else. But it's important, again, for your campaigners and followers to have that sense that there is a time frame here and we're going to do it in a certain amount of time. Refining your message, and I'm going to have to speed up here enormously, this is key. This is absolutely key. Your messaging is key to winning these notorious hearts and minds. And let me tell you that it is hearts even more than minds. People think they're driven by mind. They're actually driven in when it comes to vote and they're thinking about voting. It is emotion, it is affect, it is heart. And that really goes right across the board, which doesn't mean that you don't need all of the scientific and the social and the economic arguments. You do. But people, when they go through all of those arguments, have to find the heart of the issue. And if they don't find the heart of the issue, they don't feel passionate enough to go and do something about it. And that's your job, I think, to actually supply that heart. So we spent a lot of time in both campaigns, researching what people were thinking, what they were feeling, what their fears were, what their reservations were, why were they indifferent or why were they passionate, what did they really desire, and that was about their fears, it was about their desires, and it was also about the kinds of values that really mattered to them. We did some of that research for marriage equality. We did an awful lot more for the abortion campaign, precisely because it was much more complicated. But also we had learned our lesson, I think, very well, that the more you understand about your electorate, the people you're going to be talking to and with, the better you can actually have those conversations, the more productively you can have them. And in coming to that kind of understanding, you also develop a lot of respect for the people that you are going to be talking to and with. And I think that's something which communicates itself in any campaigning. The fact that you respect people, whatever their viewpoints, they are entitled to hold them. That doesn't mean you're not going to try and persuade them to think otherwise, but that it really is important. And all of this is helping you to outline your strategy. And messaging and tone are really, really important. Just a very quick word about that is to remember that in a referendum, you directly address and talk with the people. The people are sovereign. And in Ireland, the people love to think of themselves as sovereign. They think, keep the politicians out. They are very wary of political party control of referendums. Now, very often it is politicians who help push it through at the very last moment. But nonetheless, people want to make up their own minds. So they don't want to be lectured. They don't want to be hectored. They don't want to be told what to think. They want information. They want to be informed, but they want to feel they are making up their own minds. So that was why in both marriage equality and repeal, we had a very strong emphasis on talking with, have a conversation with, ask me why I'm voting for repeal, ask me why I'm voting for marriage equality, which gives agency to the people who are going to be voting. And I think it's hard to do. You kind of have to train yourself to do it, not to stand up and point the finger, but to say, Is there something more you would like to know? What else, in what other way can I help you? And what do you think of all of that? Always remember that in a referendum campaign, you're not talking to your own people. You're not talking to the converted. You're talking, and you're not talking to your opponents, your visceral, skeptical deniers. No point. And no point in talking to those who are already converted. They should be out there campaigning their socks off anyway and not have time to listen to you. You're talking to the people who are wavering, who haven't yet made up their minds, who are persuadable, who you can pull back from the brink of denial. That's who you have to focus on. And really bear that in mind. And sometimes your own side get a bit cross that they're not being spoken to. So you're pitching your arguments and you're pitching your conversations at a level and in a tone that people can access readily and have available to them in their ordinary everyday language. We did that. It's the majority of the voters. We did it absolutely stringently in repeal, and I think it really paid dividends. And I learned something really important from the great late Noel Whelan, who some of you will remember as a really remarkable journalist and a barrister. And he was very central in the marriage equality campaign. And we started off on different sides. Noel was much more Fianna Fáil and I was much more way over somewhere on the left. So we were a little skeptical of one another. But he said something one day, and I have never, ever, ever forgotten it. We ended up respecting one another hugely, I should say. Well, I did him anyway. He said, this is not about winning an argument. It's about winning a referendum. You're not trying to prove anything. You are trying to persuade and bring people with you. And after all of that, of course, there's the organising. And let me just say that I can tell you that what lost the other side in both cases, both referendums, what really lost it for them was their fragmentation. They could not come together as a coalition or a platform and fight for what they wanted together. They did it in little fragments and it was an absolute mess. What we did was, in each case, we came together. In the case of the coalition and then Together for Yes, I mean, we started off with 12 organisations in 2013 and was something like 130 by the time we came to fight. And we said from the get-go, we can't fight it on our own as right to choose activists or feminists or whatever. We can't do that. We need to bring in a whole, cross-sectoral, diverse group of people. And in fact, we always said, we're broad, we're diverse, but we're focused. I think we tried always to be focused, and I think we did. And then finally, in Ireland, it has to be local. It has to be local. National has to become local very fast. It's a small country, but people really like to be directly addressed. They like to see their radio stations, their favourite local podcasts, their newspapers, meetings in their town. So the referendum bus that goes around from town to town is really, really, really important. And I have to say, it's also great fun. There's nothing better than a really wonderful campaign for getting the adrenaline going. What you can do right now is clarify your aim, clarify what you want, and start the work of working out what your strengths are, what your assets are. I mean, I can see them. You have an absolutely incontrovertible issue. Absolutely, your cause is absolutely just. You have the people that they are raring to go. They keep saying, what are we going to do during the winter? We've no referendum campaign. Hopefully we'll be past the pandemic and campaigning will be able to happen again. You have the court case behind you. You have international activism and you have so much going for you. And the weaknesses and the obstacles you face, you have to get together and work out what they are. Do not think that no money is an obstacle. We had no money and it became quickly not an obstacle anymore because we got it in through crowdfunding and we got in loads of money. And I think there'll be loads of people around Ireland who really, really, really now want to do something about the environment. So I'll just finish by saying, be ambitious, be strategic, be clear, be passionate, and never, ever let anybody tell you, don't let them put you off. People used to say to me, oh, you'll never do it, you'll never do it. And I would always say, oh, yes, we will. You wait and see, we will. And they all had to eat whatever it is they had to eat, and accept that, yes, we set out to do it and we did it, and you will too, and I will certainly fully support you in any way I can. Thank you.
Wow, thanks so much, Ailbhe, for that masterclass in how to organise. I'm sure many people like me also will just be watching back the recording of this webinar to take better notes of everything you just said. So thank you so much for sharing your experiences. And I think it's timely as well. Sorry, just to note as well, we're likely to go a bit over time. If anybody needs to leave early, no problem, but just to facilitate the Q&A. So I'll move to Carlos just momentarily, but just wanted to flag also that something kind of further to what Ailbhe was saying about how it's, you know, it's not good that the politicians aren't going to be the leaders on this, I guess. I mean, the climate and biodiversity emergencies were declared around the 9th of May, I think, 2 years ago. So it's coming up on the 2nd anniversary of those being declared, and there hasn't been, you know, much action since. So, you know, it's really not going to come from the top down. So anyway, moving on to another really fascinating aspect of this conversation. We're delighted to be joined by Carlos Olaya from Dejusticia in Colombia. And I'll just let you all know who he is. So Carlos is a researcher in environmental justice. He's currently working on investigations into the effects of anti-deforestation policy and the implementation of their really interesting Colombian Supreme Court ruling, which recognized rights to the Amazon region. Carlos is a lawyer with a master's degree in constitutional law from the National University of Colombia. He's worked as a researcher, advisor, and in technical support for grassroots organizations, and has previously been a lecturer of legal research at the National University of Colombia. So we're thrilled to be joined today, Carlos, and as we said earlier in the webinar, I'm not sure if you were here, we hope you're safe and everything's okay. We can send our solidarity to you in Colombia. Thanks.
Good evening, everyone. Do you hear me?
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Okay. First of all, I'm sorry for my bad English. If you do not understand me, please interrupt me. Second of all, may I use slides?
Yes, you should be a host, so you can share screen
Okay,
on the bottom. Yeah.
Can you see my slides?
Yep. It might be helpful to change to slideshow. Yeah, perfect. Great. Thanks, Carlos.
Okay, so I'm going to answer this question in my presentation. What difference has the rights of nature made in Colombia? And I'm going to develop it in 5 topics. First, some starting points. Second, what changes has this discourse made in our context? Third, some of the problems of the implementation of this framework from the case of Amazonia. 4, what's the problem? And 5, what to do then? I hope this presentation ignites some questions and discussions about your own proposal in Ireland. So some starting points. First, what is nature? When we speak of rights of nature, we may be speaking of 3 different things. We are talking about non-human animals rights, or ecosystems rights, or the biosphere rights. Right now, I don't know any case of biosphere rights. I know cases of non-human animals. And in Colombia, this framework has been used for ecosystems rights. So I'm going to speak about this second alternative of nature. Second, what are rights? Rights may be defined as tools of government because they are issued in laws, but mainly they are tools of the weak to fight injustices. So if we are going to discuss what difference has those rights made, we are speaking of what difference are they making for the people who are fighting environmental injustices. And third, we don't have the rights of nature in our constitution. Our constitution has some articles that recognize the right to enjoy a healthy environment, but the rights of nature framework has been or has arrived in Colombia through activism from judges, from active interpretation of the constitution. Now, what difference has this framework made in Colombia? First, I like to say that nature's rights started a new environmentalist boom in our country. After the first case of the Atrato River, a dozen of cases appeared between 2016 and 2020. These are the cases. We can discuss in detail in the Q&A section. I just have to clarify that those in red are the cases that were reversed. But that I mean that in the first instance, the judges recognized the rights of nature, but in the second instance, the Supreme Court reversed that decision. What were their decisions? These cases take the following 4 types of orders. First, to recognize non-state guardians of the ecosystems. Second, to establish a board of experts. Third, to design or to order the design of ad hoc environmental plans. And third, they ordered substantial measures to protect ecosystems. As you see, most of these cases are about the design of ad hoc environmental plans. I have problems here with my pictures. No problem. So it is undeniable that these cases have amplified attention and support to all of these environmental causes. Academic attention, media attention, and institutional support to those environmental movements and to solve those environmental conflicts. But when we see implementation of these orders, we return to the same old environmental issues. And I will explore this with the Amazonia case. So let's remember that the Amazonia case was the initiative of 25 youngsters against deforestation in the Amazon region of Colombia. And the Supreme Court of Colombia gave them reason and framed this solution. The Supreme Court said we need 4 types of plants to stop deforestation, and the judges made an urgent call to increase actions against deforestation. 3 years later, results are not great yet. As you see, deforestation rates decreased between 2018 and 2019, but they have increased again in 2020. So we have a rebound in deforestation. And with the plans that the Supreme Court ordered, we don't have the ministerial action plan. We don't have an intergenerational plan that the court ordered. We have 3 plans ready out of 5 in the regional landscape, and in the municipal level, we have only 3 plans out of 58. But in the implementation, we see many problems, old problems that we have seen in environmental conflicts in Colombia. First, the state doesn't work well in the border of Amazonian rainforests. First, there's a low governmental infrastructure. And second, those places are disputed by illegal armed groups. In the case of Amazonia, mainly by residual guerrilla groups that remained after the Second, the state has used the ruling, the Amazonia ruling, to support all coercive conservation measures, against vulnerable people. So deforestation in Colombia is a really complex issue. Many people is involved, including poor peasants who need to clear forests to maintain their lives. And the Colombian state has focused only on those vulnerable peasants. third, local peasant and indigenous communities have opposed this ruling. For instance, indigenous communities of the Amazonia say that the Colombian state have for centuries neglected human rights for them, and now Amazonia have rights, but there's a pending issue that their rights have been misguaranteed. Finally, Amazonia is now saturated with plants. Even before the ruling, there's a lot of initiatives, a lot of cooperation money flowing for projects, but these projects are not focused on the very difficult issues that I have shown before. So what's the problem? It is a problem of design or of implementation of nature's rights. I believe there are three positions. First one, there are those who says nature's rights frameworks are right, but implementation is a different issue. So the solution is let's develop further nature's rights. Position number two says implementation problems are a direct result of nature's rights framework. Some of the local communities that I know have this position. They said those nature's rights are issued from urban contexts, from the offices, and we are paying the results of that. So their solution is let's stop that. Let's stop the nature's rights framework. And position three is we have the same implementation problems with or without nature's rights. So the solution is let's think environmental rights differently. My position is number three, and maybe because I'm a pessimist because I'm involved in the following of.
Sorry, Carlos, you're muted there. If you could just unmute yourself. Sorry. Thanks. Yeah, if everybody else, if they could stay on mute, but not you. Thanks so much.
Okay. What was I saying?
Oh, we just missed just 30 seconds.
This slide.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, thanks.
So I support position three because I think that the right of
Sorry, Carlos, you're gone again there. Thanks.
I don't know what's happening. Someone is. Okay. Do you hear me?
Right. Yeah, all good.
So,
thanks.
I believe that the right to a healthy environment and rights of nature, at least in Colombia, has more or less the same solutions. We have from rights of nature, guardians of the ecosystem, but we have also great developments in environmental participation through the right to a healthy environment, as well as ad hoc plans and the legal standing issue. So I believe that we are trapped in a roundabout, trying to figure out what foundations we need to support our solutions, but our solutions face exactly the same problems. So what to do? I propose two alternatives. Oh, sorry. First one, let us think implementation rules from the beginning. Let us think what is the concrete problem and what will be the concrete solutions. I believe that in Colombia, litigations around nature's rights has this problem, is that nature's right is so good, so it sounds so sexy that we try to implement new solutions with this framework, but we forget to think the concrete problems and solutions. And second, I believe that there are other alternatives, non-anthropocentric theories, or at least not that anthropocentric theories, like, for example, territorial rights for animals. That is a proposal from philosopher Wilkin Lica. Or to believe that nature doesn't need rights because it is a superior being. Some indigenous peoples have told me that they say, for us, rights of nature doesn't make sense because nature is not in danger. We are in danger because we are not respecting our superior being commands. And that's it. Thanks for your attention.
Thanks a million, Carlos. That was really fascinating. As I said, like another kind of aspect to what we've been. Oh, sorry, my thing was off. Yeah, another aspect to this conversation, and it's also really interesting to try and tease out where Ireland fits in the rights of nature conversation, because you know, many countries that have recognised rights of nature have indigenous peoples who have, you know, been catalysts and been fighting for those rights, whereas we don't necessarily have the same culture. So it's just a really interesting question about how that could apply for us here. So thank you so much for sharing. So as obviously it's 8 o'clock now, so we're just we're going to go a bit over time, but if everybody is okay to stay on a little bit, we'll have the Q&A now. So I'll pass over to my colleague Helena, who's going to facilitate the Q&A discussion. Thanks.
So apologies. So I see that there's a couple of questions here. Just give me a moment. That's having a little bit of a glitch. Apologies.
I might just jump in then, just while we wait for.
Yeah, sorry, I'm frozen.
No, you're grand. I might just on the point of the value of having a constitutional right to the environment, and the question that was raised in the Supreme Court judgment in our case about what a constitutional right would add further to the right to life and right to bodily integrity. How can we communicate what we feel the right does add further to those, or is it, how do we show that it's not just a symbolic thing and that it actually would be practically useful? I suppose what I'm asking at is, you know, what formulation would be needed in order for a right to have practical impacts, and how can we communicate that value? I'm not sure, maybe David could answer that. Thanks.
Emer, you must be a mind reader, because I was hoping somebody would ask that question. You know, the judge in the Supreme Court of Ireland was flat out wrong when he said that the right to life and those other human rights seem to have the same content as the right to a healthy environment. And I can point you to two crystal clear examples of that. One is that in the jurisprudence of the European Court of Human Rights, where, you know, Article 2 of the European Convention says everyone has the right to life. Article 8 is the right to private home and family life. And the European Court has very clearly said that, and this is a direct quote, there is no right to nature protection in the European Convention. And so this is one of the biggest differences between the right to a healthy environment and the other existing human rights, is that the right to a healthy environment encompasses protection of biodiversity and ecosystems, which are the basis of all human health and well-being. So that point was made with great clarity by the Inter-American Court of Human Rights in 2017 in a what's called an advisory opinion, where they said, the Inter-American Court said that the thing that distinguishes the right to a healthy environment from other human rights is that the right to a healthy environment protects the elements of the environment, such as rivers, forests, oceans, etc. And so what's happening in Latin America, which is really fascinating, and this is not just in Colombia and not just in the Inter-American Court, but in Mexico and other places, is the right to a healthy environment, when it's in a constitution like in Colombia or Mexico, is being interpreted by courts there as including health for humans, so, you know, like clean air and clean water, but also health for nature and health for ecosystems themselves. And so that's a fascinating development that hasn't really come to Europe yet. But I think from an Irish perspective, you know, I think that the conservative position to take is that we should recognize the right to a healthy environment. And the more advanced and perhaps radical proposition is that we should not only recognize a human right to a healthy environment, but we should recognize you know, the rights of ecosystems as well. That, I think, is a bolder proposition, but I think it's one that, you know, it's going to be your call as to whether that's a politically viable proposition. I think that, you know, I've been working on the right to a healthy environment for about 15 years now, and I can honestly say that in all of that time, I have met like a grand total of 2 people under the age of 40 who don't just immediately agree that everyone should have a right to a healthy environment. Like, from young people's vantage point, it's just a no-brainer. And so there's quite a consensus on that. And then I think it's more of a challenge to get people to agree on the rights of nature. But I would say one other interesting example of the implementation of the rights of nature, which maybe is a bit closer to the Irish case because it's another common law country, is New Zealand, where New Zealand has passed laws recognizing the rights of ecosystems. There's 2 laws now that New Zealand has passed, one in 2014, one in 2017. I'd be happy to share references to those laws. And those laws are in the implementation process. And I think the point that Carlos made about difficulties in implementation in Colombia, I would hope that in a country like Ireland, when the court says that the government has to do something, that the government takes that as an ironclad imperative that they have to follow. So that's an important distinction between Colombia and Ireland.
Thanks a million for that. And I think what you've touched on there really links into what Ailbhe was saying on the kind of messaging point, that before we would begin, if we were going to begin a campaign, we'd need to be really clear on what it is that we're campaigning for. So we need to be sure of, it's for the, like, it would be for the people to decide really what formulation we want to be campaigning for, you know. So that's something that we definitely need to keep in mind. I might, Helena, are you available now to
yes,
take over? Great.
We've had a number of questions in. I don't know if we'll have time to deal with all of them, but we have another question specifically for David. And the question is, can you elaborate a bit or articulate a bit more on your point about how Ireland is in a unique position in the EU to drive the creation of rights for the environment? If you'd like to elaborate.
Yeah, sure. So right now, the European Union is in the process of discussing whether it's going to support a United Nations resolution recognizing the right to a healthy environment at the global level through a resolution at the Human Rights Council. That's proposed to move forward as early as September of this year. And if it passes the Human Rights Council, then it would go to the General Assembly. But, you know, there's I think the role of Ireland is interesting because the United Kingdom is the one country in Europe that has been pushing back against recognition of the right to a healthy environment. And so to have an Irish voice would actually be quite powerful. And that, and it's also interesting because Scotland just went through a process, a multi-year process with lots of public consultation, expert panels, and they've just proposed new human rights legislation for Scotland. And one of the top priorities there is recognition of the right to a healthy environment. So, you know, Ireland and Scotland, and who knows what will happen with the Scottish election and independence, but maybe one day Scotland will also be writing a new constitution that includes the right to a healthy environment. But this is something that's been slow to develop in, you know, if you look at the global picture of countries that recognize the right to a healthy environment, it has been very slow in common law countries. And, you know, there's kind of like a deep historical arguments about the common law and why common law countries that kind of inherit their legal systems from the UK have been conservative about recognizing not just environmental rights, but economic, social, and cultural rights as well. And I think that's finally starting to change. We're seeing, for example, Canada bill before Parliament right now that will, for the first time, recognize the right to a healthy environment. I mentioned Scotland. United States, there's a law behind the environment. So we're finally seeing, after a long delay, a push from these common law countries. And as a common law country, I meant to say that we all basic human right that's so fundamental in a time.
Carla, you write some comments if you have any views or any experience in relation to that from your perspective in Colombia.
Well, I don't know much about Ireland's law, but I believe if you try to put your claims in a nature's rights framework, you will have some practical issues that I believe are really hard to solve. For instance, systems are those with a picture of natural ecosystems that courts could protect, or are all ecosystems in Ireland very heavily affected by humans? Some alternatives that I have heard are, for example, declaring the subject in more you define. So I believe that it may it will be a good, of course, but if you definitely like more nature's rights, you will have to face these practical issues that are not easy to resolve.
Okay, thank you for that. We have a question from Cynthia, and perhaps Ailbhe might like to address this specific issue. It's about what concrete steps can local community groups take to campaign and push for this referendum on the right to a healthy environment? If you have any thoughts.
Well, I mean, it seems to me that it's really important for local groups to put pressure in their local areas. And the first place to start is always with, I suppose, with the local councillor. With the council, I would certainly see that as really important. I mean, I noticed that Carlos was talking about the different levels at which you, Carlos, have had some success, whether it's regional or municipal or and so on and so forth. And there is absolutely no reason why everything has to start at the top. With the Constitution. In a way, there is, you know, it in some sense is much more important to build from the bottom, isn't it? Because people who have organised in their area to raise a particular issue, an environmental issue, with their local council are much more likely to then move national issues. So, but doing that presupposes that a group actually forms and gives itself a name has a real meeting every week done, and what they want, they say this is going to ruin our livelihood, so that there is a very real concrete place to start. And you know, I'm very struck by Carlos saying concrete problems need concrete solutions, so people can build up.
Thank you very much. I don't know, Emer, whether I'm aware we haven't got to all of the questions, but I also see that it's 8:15. So
sure, will we go with one more for the crack? One more.
Sure. I just need to scroll back because I apologize. I had one or two issues, so I may have missed just missed one or two. But I don't know if you have any other questions yourself, maybe Emer, about maybe bringing the threads together as a final kind of question. If you have any.
Well, I suppose then, just to kind of wrap up, guys, like what were the connecting threads between all of our speakers today? There's different ways of approaching this issue. There's, you know, a human rights focused approach. There's a rights of nature approach, and Ailbhe's really useful step-by-step guide really to a successful campaign. So I think that it's something that, you know, we're going to have to, as the population, discuss what would it mean, what would such a right look like in Ireland, what's our version of this, what works for us. Yeah, I just think it's been really yeah, fascinating, I think, discussion. I don't know, I mean, I feel like the questions could go on and on, but Helena, unless you want to pop back in with another one, perhaps we could leave it there. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
No, that's all. Yeah, it's been absolutely fascinating, and it's great to get to get other final thoughts as well from all the speakers. So I'll let you.
Yeah, and sorry, I'm just seeing Andrew Jackson has popped in the chat here about is a citizens' assembly a good forum to take the idea forward? And yeah, there have been some calls. I think I don't know, maybe Ailbhe, you could come in on this, but there's been some calls for a citizens' assembly on biodiversity to you know, to convene, and for perhaps the issue could be raised at that in that kind of a setting. And as we said, it's just coming on 2 years now since the biodiversity crisis and climate crisis was declared by the Dáil, the Irish government. So I don't know, Ailbhe, did you want to add anything on maybe how to get the issue put on the table, really, I suppose?
Well, first of all, I mean, I do think that any participative forum which is related to your cause, I think that's a very good thing, because it really does give air, it gives oxygen really to the issue, and as I was saying, it puts it on the table and on the agenda. You do have to manage it, you have to be very careful, you do have to talk to people as it's being set up to try to put some shape on it. So you have to take a very proactive role in your organization, saying these are the kinds of issues that we need to see coming up, and also to keep it focused in such a way that is going to really appeal to people. But it really is a very useful debating and discussion forum, and it does get some media attention, not maybe as much as people would like, but it does definitely get it. The second thing, though, that I would say is that I mean, certainly the findings really in the literature on seeking to persuade people is that people find it quite difficult to relate to abstract rights. They see human rights as being very, very abstract. But when you actually give them a very concrete kind of issue, a specific sort of issue, then they respond very much better. So the more specific and the more concrete you can make an issue feel for people. I mean, I'm not talking now about science or anything, I'm just being absolutely pragmatic. The more concrete you can make that issue, the better, because people, after all, we are just human beings. We want to know what is good for me in this, what is good for me, my family, my community, and maybe not much further away than that. People really do want to see those kinds of returns on their investment in fighting for something. They're not going to fight for an abstraction. They want to fight to know that they are really going to make their world and our world a better, safer place. And the final thing I would say is that when we're talking about rights in relation to the environment, to biodiversity, climate generally, I really do think that we should, at this stage in our global development, have in some sense of what our responsibility is as human beings who inhabit this planet to the environment and the planet that we live in. And I do think that constitutions should also be prepared to spell out the responsibilities of the citizens whose views that constitution effectively represents. So that's it, I think. What an exciting evening, though. Can I just say,
Yeah.
Such a pleasure and really so informative to listen to David and Carlos from their very different perspectives coming at this. And personally, I just want to get involved now, actually. So you've got a new member coming up there.
Great. Well, yeah.
Thank you both very much, David and Carlos. I really, really appreciated both your talks.
Yeah, I definitely echo that. I think this, I hope we can all stay in touch, and I think all the attendees at this webinar now hopefully will have gained something from tonight, some food for thought. From our side in Climate Case Ireland, as we say, Asquailga in Ireland, Gurmila Mahagut, to David and Carlos, thank you very much. We really appreciate your time, and yeah, I don't know, I think it was a really great discussion, and I hope others feel similarly. And yeah, I hope we can stay in touch, and I'm sure attendees can follow along on all of your and our Climate Case Ireland social media, and keep in touch and keep up to date with any campaigns that may arise. Yeah, so thanks so much.
Thank you. It's been terrific, and best of luck.
Thanks.
Yes, absolutely.
Thanks.
Great. Thanks so much. Thanks, everyone.